Dear friends, welcome to Sangha Storytime. We're going to read from A Taste of Earth by Thich Nhat Hanh. And the chapter is the Areca Tree. Tan and Lang were brothers. Though Tan was a year older than Lang, they were as alike in looks as two drops of water. No one could tell them apart. No one, that is, except the lovely Tao, whose father taught the village youth. During their years of studies together, Tan, Lang, and Tao became the best of friends. At first, Tao could not distinguish between the two brothers. They wore identical clothes, and their hair was cut the same way. Then one stormy night, when the brothers stayed late at their father's home, Tao saw her chance. She prepared rice porridge for their meal and brought out one ball and one pair of chopsticks and placed them on the table between the two brothers. She returned to the kitchen and watched them through a crack in the door. One brother motioned to the other to eat first, a privilege reserved for an older brother. Now Tao knew which brother was Tan. She quickly brought out a second bowl for Lang. All evening she observed the brothers carefully, until she managed to discover one small difference between them. Lang had a tiny mole on his right ear. After that, her father and classmates were impressed by Tao's ability to tell the brothers apart. She never handed Tan's notebook to Lang, and she always greeted each brother by his own name. Over time, Tao noted differences in the brothers' personalities. Tan was outgoing and talkative. Lang tended to be quiet and pensive. Gradually, she could tell them apart merely by looking into their eyes. And although their voices were similar, she was sensitive enough to hear each boy's nature expressed in his words. On New Year's Day, the two brothers came to offer their respects to Tao's father. Suddenly, Tao realized that Tan was in love with her. She couldn't explain exactly why, but the look in his eyes let her know beyond the shadow of a doubt. And as for Lang, Tao was so shaken by Tan's look, she did not notice Lang. Not long afterwards, Tan's parents brought the traditional offering of salt to Tao's parents to ask for her hand in marriage to their elder son. Tao's parents agreed. With some regret, Tao left the home of her parents to go to live with her husband's family. She wished that her people still followed the old custom of having the groom live with the bride's family. But she loved Tan and was happy to be his wife. On their wedding day, Tan wore a robe, the cheerful colour of green banana shoots. Lang's robe was a deep shade of violet. Each day, Tao saw how deeply her husband loved his young brother. When she and Tan strolled beneath the moonlight, drank tea, went horseback riding, or played chess, Tan always invited Lang to join them. In fact, Lang wanted the couple to enjoy time alone, but Tan insisted on Lang's presence. Lang pretended to enjoy these occasions, while deep down he longed for more solitude. He found great contentment spending quiet moments on his own. Tan was unable to understand this in his brother and could not bear the thought of Lang being left alone. Tao tried to speak to Tan about Lang's special needs, but Tan would not listen. A new discovery added to Tao's concern. Lang was also in love with her. Love burned within him like a fiery volcano. Although he appeared cool and indifferent on the outside, Tao was sensitive enough to know the truth. One day, Lan told them he wanted to retire to a remote mountain hut where he could tend a garden and compose poems. Tao hoped her husband would support Lang's idea, but instead he insisted Lang remain with them. One dark evening, when the brothers returned from a day's labour on the rice field, Tao mistook Lang for a husband when he entered their hut first. She opened her arms to greet him. Lang hastily removed himself from her embrace, and Tao realised her error. The next morning, as they shared rice porridge, Lang informed Tang and Tao that he was taking the day off. Though he laughed as he spoke, Tao detected his anguish. She loved her husband, but that did not prevent her from feeling Lang's pain. Lang did not return that evening. 10 days passed, and there was still no word from him. Frantic, Tan left home to search for his brother. 10 more days passed, and neither brother had returned. Tao was beside herself with worry. She left home herself to look for Tan. Like both brothers, she followed the road that led out of the capital city's southern gate. There the road forked. One side led up into the mountains, the other down to the sea. She chose the mountain route. Tao walked for several days until her sandals were no more than shreds, and her feet were swollen and bloody. Matted locks of hair fell into her eyes. All she had left was a straw hat to protect her from the sun. She felt almost too weak to continue. Her heart was filled with dread. Somehow she knew that Tan and Lan had passed by this same way, that the knowledge alone kept her going. She tore strips of cloth from her shirt to wrap her blistered feet and trudged on until she came to the banks of a wide river. It was evening, and there was no ferry in sight. A slight wind rustled overhead leaves, and a few birds called in shrill voices. Tao was prepared to spend the night by the river when she noticed a tiny hut perched on stilts a couple of 100 yards away on her side of the shore. A sudden gust of wind sent dry leaves flying. Black clouds gathered on the horizon. Tao knew a storm was brewing. She made her way to the hut and climbed up the ladder to knock on the door. She was greeted somewhat cautiously by a woman who looked at her oddly, but then urged her to enter. She took Tao's hat and invited her to be seated on a low bamboo bench. Dinner was spread out on a simple mat. Tao greeted the woman's husband, who was feeding their baby spoonfuls of rice. The woman took out the extra bowl and chopsticks for Tao, but Tao politely declined. She was too exhausted to eat, but gladly accepted a bowl of hot tea. There was a sudden crash of thunder outside. Wind howled and rain beat against the hut. The sounds of the storm momentarily quietened, the storm raging in Tao's own heart. The Highland farmer lit a small lamp, which cast a dim light. His wife put their child to bed in the next room, the strains of her lullaby drowned out by the raging storm. When the baby was asleep, the woman rejoined them. Tao asked the couple, "Have you by any chance seen a young man in a green robe pass by this way recently?" Neither the man nor his wife spoke. The man looked at Tao with a strange expression. Frightened, Tao asked, "Has something happened? Have you seen them?" The man slowly answered, "Yes, we did see such a man. What's more, we saw another man who looked just like him but was dressed in white. But I don't think you'll be finding either of them now. Please spend the night with us. You can't go out in this storm. Tomorrow you can return safely home." A chill ran down Tao's spine. A feeling of doom closed in around her as she listened to the woman speak. "Move in a little closer, can you, so you can escape the draft that sneaks in by the door. I'll tell you everything I know." One afternoon, about a month ago, I saw a man dressed in white approach the river. He was empty-handed and didn't even have a hat or jacket. My husband was still working in the fields. I wanted to run out and tell the man that he had just missed the last ferry of the day, but I was occupied with my baby and couldn't go out right then. The man looked as if he was searching for something. It was odd. How he looked up the sky and down at the ground. He turned his head this way and that before sitting down on the riverbank and holding his face in his hands. He began to shake, and I could tell he was weeping. I felt uneasy and wanted my husband to hurry home so he could invite the poor fellow up to our hut. It began to rain lightly, and the man raised his head to the sky again. Then I thought he saw something, because he stretched out his arms as if to embrace somebody. But miss, all he embraced was the empty air. The rain started coming down harder, and soon I could not make him out very clearly. When my husband returned from the fields, I handed him a rain jacket and asked him to go down and fetch the fellow. The Highland farmer took a long sip of tea and said, "I found him sitting like a stone down by the riverbank, not flinching a muscle in all the wind and rain. I asked him several times to put on the jacket and join us inside, but he only shook his head. Finally, I left the jacket on the ground beside him and returned alone." The rain was really pouring by then. "It was a storm like tonight," said the woman. "We couldn't fall asleep thinking about the poor fellow. All we could hope was that he'd get up out of the rain and return to his home." At dawn, all that was left of the storm was a light drizzle. I looked out the door and I thought I saw the man still sitting by the riverbank. I put on a jacket and made my way out. Imagine my surprise when I realized it wasn't the man at all, but a large white rock. Next to the rock was the rain jacket my husband had left the night before. The man spoke. "It was so strange, miss. The pure white rock hadn't ever been there before. We don't see any rocks like that up these parts. It seemed unlikely that the man had dragged it there in the night. Anyway, I don't think 4 men could have budged that stone." Rocks don't just spring up overnight. We couldn't figure it out, and for the man we guessed he'd returned the way he'd come, to perhaps even throw himself into the river. That's what my wife thought, anyway. But I couldn't imagine what would drive a man to such desperate measures. The farmer lit his pipe and took a long, thoughtful puff. His wife continued. 10 days later, another man dressed in green came. He looked all around him like he was lost. Then he came up to our house and asked if we'd seen another man dressed in white. When my husband told him all we'd seen, his eyes filled with tears. He cried out, "My brother has turned to stone." He ran to the river to find the rock just as it was beginning to rain. We had another storm, and though we tried to convince the man to come inside, he refused to budge from the rock. He leaned against it and wept bitterly. Once again, my husband and I spent a sleepless night. In the morning, when we went outside, we didn't see the man, but there was a tree of the palm family, tall as a 10-year-old child, growing beside the rock. That tree hadn't been there before. What kind of tree grows that fast? I told my husband that the man dressed in green must have turned into the tree, and the rock was the man dressed in white. I believe the two men were brothers who loved each other deeply. Some terrible sorrow or misunderstanding must have taken place between them. But you, miss, are you related to those men? Why are you looking for them? It's another stormy night. Please don't think of going out again. Stay with us tonight, I implore you. Tao wiped her tears from her eyes and made an effort to smile. To ease the mountain couple, she pretended to make light of the whole affair. Don't worry about me. I'm the housekeeper of the man dressed in green. The man dressed in white is my master's younger brother. I'm sure they simply crossed the river early in the morning after the storms. I'll be crossing the river tomorrow myself. I'm sure I'll find them. I doubt they've gone too far. Please don't worry. I have no intention of venturing out in this storm tonight. I'd be grateful to spend the night here, and then I'll catch the first ferry in the morning. Having reassured them, Tao asked for a mat to serve as a blanket, and after the couple retired to the back room, she lay down. Wind shrieked and battered at the walls as Tao's tears soaked her mat. The lamp's wick cast a bare flicker of light that trembled in the cold draughts seeping in through the doorway. A deafening clap of thunder made Tao wonder if heaven and earth had been reduced to dust. The storm's fury seemed endless, but at long last the winds died down. Shortly before dawn, all was quiet. Tao rose, careful not to make a sound. She opened the door and climbed down the ladder. A bright moon emerged from wisps of cloud. By its light, Tao could easily make out the white rock by the shore. Slowly she walked towards it. It was just as the kind couple had described. A tree with bright green leaves and trunk stood by the rock, slightly bending over it to protect it. Tao knelt by the rock and put her arms around the tree. She hid her face in its leaves and wept. Some of her warm tears fell on the rock and seemed to sizzle. Clinging to the tree, her knees sank into the soft, muddy earth. When the couple awoke, the young woman was gone. They went down to the shore and asked the ferryman if he'd carried her across the river. He replied, "No, this is my first trip of the day. I haven't carried anyone across yet." They asked if days before he had carried a man dressed in green or a man dressed in white. Again the answer was no. The couple walked to the white rock. The tree had grown a good 2 feet in the night, and clinging to it was a fresh green vine. The roots of the vine began deep beneath the rock, which it stretched across before twining gracefully up the tree. It almost seemed to be supporting the tree to stand upright. They plucked a vine leaf and crumbled it. It gave an ardent fragrance which reminded them of the young woman whose gaze had been so deep the night before. One summer afternoon, a party on horseback, led by King Hanh II, came to rest along the river. They noticed a small shrine sheltered beneath several large trees. The king dismounted close to the shrine. There he sat down on a smooth white rock while fanning himself. An attendant offered to wave the fan for him, but the king shook his head and smiled. He pointed to the tall, straight trees around them and asked the attendant, "What kind of trees are these?" "The upper branches are laden with fruit, and do you know whose shrine this is?" The attendant did not know, but seeing the king's curiosity, he climbed one of the trees and picked two of the fruits. Another attendant, standing nearby, said, "Your Majesty, I do not know the name of these trees or fruit, but I do know something about their origin and why the shrine is here." He told the king the story of Tan, Lang, and Tao, as though he had once heard it in detail from the mountain couple. "Your Majesty, the white rock you are sitting on is the kind of rock Lang turned into. The fruit in your hand comes from the kind of tree Tan turned into, and the green vines which you are twining around the tree are like the vine Tao became. People in these parts say that the white rock represents Lang's pure heart. The tall, straight tree which shade the rocks represented Tan's desire to protect his younger brother, and the graceful vine shows the spirit of Tao, who even after death remains at her husband's side." When the parents of these young people came looking for them, the farmer and his wife explained what had happened. The two families had this shrine built. Since then, local people have committed to light incense here to honor the memory of Tan, Lang, and Tao. King Hanh regarded the fruit in his lap for a long moment. He looked at the trees and vines and gently patted the white rock as though it were a small child. He was deeply moved by the story. He handed the fruit to his attendant and said, "Please cut this fruit so I might taste it." The attendant took out a knife, peeled the fruit, and cut it into 8 sections. Each slice of the white fruit held a portion of a smooth pink seed. He placed the slice in his mouth. It was not sweet, but had a special tang he found refreshing. He crumbled a vine leaf and chewed it along with the fruit, and the combined taste was even better. His mouth watered and he spat. A few drops of his saliva fell onto the white rock and turned as red as blood. The king put a finger in his mouth and pulled it out, but there was no trace of red on it. He asked his attendant to scrape off a small chip of rock, which he chewed with the fruit and leaf. His lips were soon stained as red as a young maiden's. He invited his companions to taste a bit of the fruit, with leaf and rock. They all found the tangy taste most agreeable, and soon their lips were stained red as well. King Hanh spoke. "The love and bond between two brothers and husband and wife have borne a deep and ardent fruit. I decree that from now on, this fruit, leaf, and rock will be used in place of the traditional offering of salt for marriage proposals and weddings. They shall be symbols of love and fidelity." The others bowed to acknowledge the king's decree. Soon after that, the trees and vines were planted throughout the kingdom. The trees were named Cal, after Tan and Lang's family name, and the vine was called Lu, after Tao's family name. Thus the custom of chewing areca wrapped in a betel leaf with a silver sliver of quicklime began among the people. And that, dear friends, is the end of that story.